Okay guys, this is Modules 10, Lesson 19, Classroom Test. Wow, if you have made it all the way to this point, you're doing pretty good and you're almost done, but we still got two big lessons to take a look at, and this one is Lesson 19, Classroom Test. Like I already said, this is a pretty big and important lesson. Anyhow, so let's take a look at our aims, guys. So our first aim for today's lesson is that we're going to look at what we can test, the value of testing, and also we're going to look at something called receptive skills. And don't worry if you don't understand what that means right now, we're going to go through it together. Okay, after that, we're going to look at something very important. We're going to look at different types of questions that you can ask on a test and kind of their pros and cons. Also, we're going to take a look at testing grammar and writing. Our last aim for today's class is that we're going to look at two different types of marking, and we're also going to be taking a look at oral tests. So we got a lot of different things to do today, guys. That's why I wore this suit, because it's a busy day, business suit. I think I also wore a suit maybe in Module 3. Maybe I had to go to a wedding later that day. I can't remember. Anyhow, so yeah, let's be formal. All right, I'll see you guys in the first activity. Okay guys, so before we really get into activity 1, there's something we need to discuss really quickly, and that is the value of testing. Of course, testing is valuable, but why, right? Now, I want to break this into two different categories. I want to think about the value of testing for teachers, but also the value for testing for students also, right? So let's focus on for the teacher first. They, tests, tell the teacher, what do tests show teachers? Now, of course, you guys probably got some ideas right now. Of course, tests show teachers how students are doing, right? And this gives them a lot of marks that they can assign to individual students, right? But I'd like to think of 3 different things that tests tell teacher. And the first thing here is pretty basic. Of course, they tell the teacher what students can and cannot do, or basically what students know and don't know, right? This is the most basic point of testing, right? Maybe you give them a test and you see that, oh, okay, students do understand prepositions, or at least most of them do. However, on the other hand, they're having a lot of trouble using some certain vocabulary, right? So this shows you what they can and they cannot do. But after seeing this, this shows the teacher something even more valuable, right? Because this leads into our second point. If you can see what students can and cannot do, this also shows you something, right? And I would say here that this shows how successful, right? And what do you think I mean by successful, right? I mean your teaching. How successful the teaching has or has not been, right? Now, if all of your students do quite well on a test, congratulations, you've done a pretty good job of teaching them, right? However, if a lot of the students do very poorly on the test and they get a very low mark, this should be a wake-up call for you, right? You should realize this should be kind of an alarm. Oh no, the students have made a lot of mistakes. That means that maybe I didn't focus on a certain point enough, right? And I'm gonna have to change my lessons in the future, right? Now, I'm not saying here if all of your students do really bad on a test that you should kick yourself, right? Like, oh no, I'm such a bad teacher, all my students did really poorly, right? But I am saying here that if they have done quite poorly on a test, maybe on a certain specific point, then it means you need to adapt your lessons, right? So that kind of leads into the third point that I want to make here. That for teachers, and this is also very valuable, it shows what areas, by areas that could mean grammar, it could mean writing, it could mean listening, whatever. It shows what areas need to be focused on or re-taught again, right? So of course testing is really, really valuable for teachers, but it's not just about focusing on students' marks, right? It's more about focusing on your teaching, because testing provides you with really, really valuable feedback, right? It really shows you, has your class been successful or not, right? And if it hasn't, don't worry about it so much, right? Just adapt your lessons, modify them, focus on a certain area more. Maybe they did really, really well on one area, right? Then that can also show you that maybe you don't need to focus on that area so much anymore. Maybe you need to move on further to something else that they had more difficulty with. But of course, testing is very valuable for the teacher, but it's also valuable for students too, right? And of course, you guys can remember being students. So what do tests tell students? Now, first off, of course, it tells them, or it shows them, how well they are progressing, right? It shows the students how their progress is going, right? Are they doing well? Are they not doing well? That's what it can show them. But this is not the most important thing, right? But it kind of leads into the second point I would like to make about students. This can also show students where they need to focus their attention as learners, right? Again, just like for teachers, if the students notice like, hey, wow, I did really, really good on prepositions, but I didn't do very well on changing irregular verbs into the past tense, I guess I gotta study irregular verbs again, right? So, of course, it can show, I'm gonna say here, shows where they need to focus their attention as learners. Or of course, that's what I really hope students are doing anyhow, right? Of course, there will be some students who get their tests back and they're like, no, I didn't do well, whatever, I don't care. Meh, right? But for some good students, they will really focus on some of the mistakes they made. Anyhow, guys, the last point I'd like to make here for students is that hopefully if students have done poorly on a test, hopefully it shows them whether they need to take the class more seriously or not, and add some goals that they can reach towards. So that's kind of the big last thing here, but it shows whether they need to take the class more seriously or not. And add goals that, ooh, this is pretty long, they can reach towards. Okay, that probably looks pretty messy there, guys, but anyhow, so yeah, it shows students whether they need to take this class more seriously or not, or I really hope that it does, right? Because if students do relatively poorly on a test, hopefully this is, again, for them, just like for you, hopefully it's a wake-up call, right? Hopefully they realize, oh no, I did really, really bad on this test. I really need to refocus my attention and I gotta make some goals for myself. I gotta be more serious about this class, right? And I remember when I was younger in high school, of course I had to take French in Canada, and I think there were 1 or 2 tests when I did really, really poorly, and it really, really scared me because French is very important for going to university in Canada. So because of that, it really, really pushed me to refocus my attention, to become more serious about the class, and like to achieve a higher mark, right? And I'm really hoping that it does that for other students too, right? Not everybody is going to be like that. But anyhow, so yeah, this is what testing it shows the teacher and also shows the students. Of course, testing is very valuable, right? Next thing we're going to take a look at is the different kinds of things that we can test. So get ready for activity 1, guys. I'll see you guys in a few seconds. Okay guys, so it's time to take a look at activity 1, right? And I've got some stuff over here and some stuff over here. And basically we're talking about what should we test, right? So when we're going to be testing things, we're kind of thinking about 8 different things, and we can break it into 2 different categories, right? So as you guys can see in your activity, you got we can test language, right? To see what the students have learned. So we can test their grammar skills or also vocabulary, spelling, maybe test also their pronunciation, although I don't really like testing pronunciation so much, but that's just me. Anyhow, and of course we can test skills. And when we're talking about skills, we're only talking about the 4 basic language skills. So of course we've got our listening, our speaking, our reading,